So a couple of us from the Sheffield IWW went down to Marseille to the Workers' Economy Conference, and it was hosted by Fralib, which is an occupied factory which produces tea bags. And it had groups and activists and workers from all over Europe and Latin America.
The struggle started on the 28th of September 2010 when Unilever decided to close down the factory. We knew it wasn't because the factory wasn't productive, but because Unilever wanted to make even more money by operating where production costs were lower. Straight away, we were thinking about how to save the factory. We wanted to keep the factory running, but we weren't able to carry on producing for Unilever. We quickly realised the solution was to occupy the factory and form a workers' cooperative. So that's been our project, to carry on the various aspects of production and to preserve the Elephant brand name. Elephant started in Marseille 120 years ago, and we think it belongs more to the workers than a multinational who bought the name in 1970. We want to keep the brand, keep the jobs, and go back to a more natural process of production using regional suppliers. There were 182 workers when the factory closed, and now there are 76 of us occupying the factory. We envision a project whereby 100 or so people would be engaged in production. Unilever had us turning out 3,000 tonnes of tea per year, and we propose making 1,000 tonnes. So we think our project is realistic, ambitious, and importantly, the only way to maintain activity on this site.
My name's Vika. I've been quite involved in Occupy London in the last 3 years since the camp was there, and specifically in the international networks, plus other things like facilitating assemblies and managing some of the online platforms that we have. I'm very interested in the projects that are happening here because they're focusing on the long term. I think sometimes when in activism you're constantly thinking of like, oh, we have to fight against this and working towards like the next action of the next 2 months or things like that. Well, here we're talking about very concrete projects that are trying to build things for a better future, and that they're built on a completely different time frame as well, which involve a whole series of difficulties, but also the forming of communities around these projects and commitment and continuity that also lacks very often in activism, where there's like a coming and going from protest groups and so on. So it's very inspiring, incredibly inspiring. It's also very good to have South Americans here because they're bringing us their experiences of projects that are still ongoing after 10 years. And I think that's really important, both to give hope and to give direction to people that are just starting, because sometimes you really feel like, it's all in your mind, you're dreaming something, but it's not going to become real, and to actually see that, like in other countries, these have continued to exist and expanded and multiplied. It's incredibly inspiring, and they've shared their experiences a lot and in a very useful way, very practical way, so I think it's been very good.
My name is Dario Azzolini. I work at the University of Linz, and my research is mainly on workers' control. We gained factories, factory occupations, and different forms of local self-government. So I've been studying different experiences mainly in Latin America. I published several books on different things, but one on like a compilation on workers' control, Ours to Master and to Own. It's been translated a few languages now. I'm working on more volumes, and out of that the idea came up of the website Workers' Control Net. It's not just about workers' control, but it's generally about self-administration of everything. So horizontal democracy and direct democracy, and no representation and no capitalism, neither in communities or society nor in the working world. So our idea was that we are convinced that apart from that, workers' control is necessary, is important, is the only viable solution, But apart from that, we also think that the crisis opened some kind of windows of chances to change, and we think it's important to push in this moment to make all experiences available historically and theories about it, but also concrete experiences.
Okay, so the project is, let's say, the idea of the project started very broad, and part of the work that we've done up to now is really trying to understand and to define what it is that we want to map. And because you can go from mapping something that's very specific from an occupied factory, for example, that is managed completely horizontally and that wants to keep completely out of the market logics, but that's not really the world we live in. So like that would be a very limited mapping, while we think that also like situations that are hybrid, that do not cover all the ideals that we would like to reach, are just as important. And the other thing that we discussed was that even if like what our main motivation was to map those activities that are already trying to create a new type of economy, a new type of way of organizing and so on, we thought that at the same time it was important to map also the struggles that are accompanying this, both to sort of have a clear description of the realities in the different countries, but also because very often from these struggles new forms of organizing are created. In the tour that I had this morning, what struck me was like the worker that kept on saying, you know, I haven't been struggling here for 3 years to just replicate the way the factory was run before. Yeah. I mean, I'm working on this project because I believe that we can do things differently, and if it goes back to what it was before, I'm not part of it. Yeah. And that you can really see that that's come out of a whole process of reflection on what his work was about.
Hi, well, I'm Patrick Cunningham. I live and work in Mexico City. I'm a sociology lecturer. I think I'm one of the few members of the IWW in Mexico, although I must admit to be behind on my dues. I personally have my doubts about the cooperative movement because I think cooperativism has a long time ago been co-opted by capitalism, and most of the cooperatives around these days are just capitalist enterprises, really. Well, the two cases I know best in Mexico, the ones I was talking about yesterday, Pascual and Euskadi, the tire manufacturer. They were both cooperatives that came out of really hard struggles in which workers were killed and so on. But today they are capitalist businesses, and the workers who helped to set up those cooperatives, they're recuperated businesses. Today are the management. Okay, they are associate members of a cooperative, but they employ other workers to work for them, and those other workers are not members of the cooperative. So, and I think the whole question of self-management is finally a political one, because you cannot have economic self-management like a cooperative without political self-management, unless it's so that it can keep its anti-capitalist nature. Otherwise, recuperation by capitalism is almost inevitable, I think.
So while the struggle in Fralib was incredibly inspiring, there is some concern about how this could be replicable in the UK, because we don't have the law here, which means that factories can be taken over and taken back from their owners in the national interest. This would mean that we could not do such things here because we'd be met by state and police repression immediately. Similarly, it did raise a lot of issues about the potential limitations of worker self-control and the cooperative movement under capitalism, and how you avoid suddenly just being co-opted by these forces is always a kind of a consideration. But in general, it just was incredibly inspiring to see the size, the strength of the struggle, and how the workers in Fralib are linking up with comrades in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, in Germany, and also in Latin America. And this is something that I think we really can learn from.